Now to just fully engage and reach my full potential, and that has been incredible to experience.
Good afternoon. I hope everybody had a great lunch and welcome back. Our panel this afternoon is Ridge to Reef, and it's looking at the connection between our land and our sea. Just a couple of reminders for you. Don't forget you can submit questions on the comment cards, and if you're online, please go to tweet your questions to @MarineSanctuary with the hashtag #CHOW2017. We'd like to show just a couple of videos from our sponsors now. Thanks. So as I mentioned this morning, we're going to really explore today quite a bit around the social and health impacts of our oceans on our communities. And yesterday, as we mentioned, we talked a little bit about kind of noise pollution. This morning, we talked about ocean plastics and plastic pollution. Today, we're going to explore a little bit about that kind of land-based side of the equation. As you know, agricultural runoff can be a major challenge in marine conservation, and we don't always think about how we form partnerships with farmers to help us to actually address this challenge. So we're very lucky today that we have Seth Watkins with us, who's been working with the Walton Family Foundation program. And they work to really create a healthy ocean environment by dedicating time and resources to healthy rivers and watersheds, including those along the Mississippi River and the Gulf of Mexico. Mr. Watkins is owner of Pinhook Farms. It's a farm in Iowa implementing sustainable practices. Seth and Pinhook Farms have worked with the Walton Family Foundation, and we're really pleased to have him here with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the kind introduction, and thank you all for having me here today. This is going to be a TED Talk, but it's going to be farmer style. What that means is I'm a lot better at caring for cattle than I am at public speaking, and I very seldom get an audience or a panel that's this talented, so I'm going to have to use my notes a lot. I've been asked to share my experiences with sustainable farming techniques, their benefits to business, and their ability to improve water quality in our rivers, lakes, and oceans. And I think this is a pretty good place to start. Can we back up? Sorry. I already did this wrong. Can you back up one? That's it. I didn't know it was up there. So anyway, what we've got right here, the little star is the location of Pinhook Farm. We're located in southwest Iowa, and the point I'm making is any water that falls on or passes over Pinhook Farm ultimately lines up, for me, my personal hypoxia zone is the Gulf of Mexico that you can see right there. And in my opinion, many of the problems we face with our lakes and oceans are related to modern farming practices and Farm Bill policy. I thought it might be best if we began with a little bit of history on the Farm Bill and the science of agriculture's relationships to our lakes and oceans. We've had the Farm Bill since 1933, making agriculture the oldest public-private partnership in the history of our nation. This partnership was formed to solve the social, economic, and ecological problems caused by the Dust Bowl. This man-made crisis has been recognized as the worst ecological disaster in the history of our country. And what we learned from the Dust Bowl was that the way we farm and use our land has the power to either aggravate or alleviate our world's social, economic, and environmental issues. Now, since 1970, or in the 70s, when Secretary of Agriculture Earl Butz told farmers to get big or get out, our country has had a production-focused farm bill. The concept was to use cheap oil, abundant land, chemicals, modern equipment, and technology to make U.S. agriculture the most productive in the world. This policy has produced incredible amounts of commodities, but it's also had its share of negative unintended consequences. I think understanding the science of how land and sea interact will help us all to understand our current farm bill, how our current farm bill and farming practices impact our lakes and oceans. Land and sea are connected via the planet's major biogeochemical cycles, and agriculture has become a major regulator of interactions by accelerating several major fluxes, specifically sediment, carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus. Current industrial agriculture processes increase the flux of nutrients that eutrophy the land-ocean interface, thereby increasing the number, size, persistence, and impact of hypoxic zones and toxic algae blooms, that result from decreased land cover, increased mechanization, greater erosion, and fertilizer mismanagement. Because of the reliance on fossil fuel, tillage, chemicals, and synthetic fertilizer, these agriculture practices release massive stores of carbon, otherwise sequestered in vegetation and soil organic matter, into the atmosphere. This has accelerated ocean acidification because 30 to 40% of anthropogenic atmospheric carbon is absorbed by the planet's water bodies, with our oceans being the largest sink. This degrades marine ecosystems and has negative consequences for marine wildlife and the roughly 700 million people who rely directly upon their oceans for their livings. I have reached out to some pretty good scientists to help me with this introduction. I'm a farmer from Iowa. I very seldom use 7-syllable words like biogeochemical. So why don't you let me express this in my terms? If we don't get our act together upstream, things don't look very good for our lakes and oceans downstream. So is there a better way? And I noticed you've gotten to see beautiful pictures of marine wildlife. I thought it was time you could see some cattle, if that's all right. So I'm going to start, every farm is different. Every farmer has different challenges. And one of the things I say about pointing fingers is a sign of a broken system. I'm going to talk about what I do, not what other people do, and I want to emphasize that. Most people are trying their best and doing their best. But what I want to share with you is a little background about Pinhook Farm and why 20 years ago I decided to take a different approach. I'm the 4th generation. My daughter is here. She's the 5th generation on our farm. It was established by my great-grandfather, James Shambaugh, in 1846. The entire operation has grown from an 80-acre land grant to about 3,200 acres, of which my wife and I own 400, and we rent the rest, which is pretty typical of an Iowa farm. Within this, we've got about 2,400 acres of rotationally grazed pasture. We have about 400 acres of corn, oats, and alfalfa and cover crops that we use for winter feed for the cattle. There's 240 acres of CRP that we've restored to prairie. And there's at least 160 acres of land that's simply set aside for wildlife and riparian protection, ponds, streams, shallow water habitats, and the like. Our revenue comes primarily from beef cattle. We have about 600 mama cows. We have an outfitting business. We offer land mitigation for offset lead credits. I get USDA subsidy payments. I think I'd better be pretty transparent. I'm a farmer. I get money from the government. At the very least, I think you all deserve clean water and healthy soil for your investment in me. And my wife's very good job as an early childhood special education teacher. Now, until 1998, I ran Pinhook Farm in a very conventional manner. Lots of tillage, very heavy reliance on fossil fuel, chemicals, antibiotics. Calved my cows in February and March because that's what the industry experts told me to do, even though it made no sense for a ruminant animal to be giving birth in that awful weather. And a lot of these things really didn't feel right to me, but at the same time, all my neighbors were doing the same thing, and the industry rhetoric was focused on production. And after all, who was I to question the judgment of these industry representatives? They wore clean clothes, drove new pickups, and gave me free hats. So anyway, on March 11, 1998, a massive blizzard hit. And in the aftermath, I asked a simple question. I said, why am I working against Mother Nature? And in asking that question, I decided to trust my gut. I decided I wanted to build a system that made clean water, healthy soil, and happy cows. This meant building a system focused on stewardship instead of production. Now, if the experts were right, and I failed because I decided to work with Mother Nature instead of try to conquer her, so be it. I felt I could sleep at night because I'd done right by the cows and the land. So here's where I started. Where'd she? Ah, there she is. I simply moved my calving date from February 1st to April 1st. And this resulted in fewer calving and health problems, lower vet costs, greater herd performance, lower costs from reduced feed, fuel, and labor costs. And what I learned is that Mother Nature knew best. So I've been implementing conservation practices that follow her lead ever since. Now, before I go any further, though, I want us to keep in mind that sustainability is about continuous improvement. As our population increases and our resources decline, the demands placed on farmers and policymakers and fishermen and the people I'm talking to become more and more challenging. We have to accept that there is no single solution and that the practices which worked in the past may need additional enhancements or in some cases may be obsolete. This is why it's so important to build a system instead of focusing on individual solutions. Now, following nature's lead in building this system has put me on the right path, but I also know there's continual need for improvement to meet the demands of a growing world. So I'm going to highlight the conservation practices that have had the greatest impact on my system so far, and then we'll tie together how they also impact the oceans. So what we're talking about is ecological solutions, and this is a great picture. These are some late season calves, and they're grazing a pasture interseeded with clover. What we found out, why should I buy synthetic nitrogen that winds up on our rivers and streams when I can follow nature's lead and actually put legumes back in my pastures? And then with that, we moved on. One of the reasons the clover was gone is we'd gotten in the habit of spraying everything. Now, I still use some chemicals. I'm not an organic farmer. I'm not to that point yet. But what we wound up doing was called integrated pest management. Instead of using chemicals everywhere where they'd kill the clover and some of the things we needed, we only treated where we had a real problem, where we had thistles or brushy weeds that we're trying to manage. We improved our grazing practices, rotating pastures to try to mimic what the bison would do. This allows rest and recovery, and you actually find out you can do more with less. And we've prioritized clean water by building ponds, shallow water habitats, and restricting the cows from the riparian areas. The cattle need clean water as much as we do. Calves weaned where we have clean water weigh about 50 pounds more at 7 months of age than calves that had to drink dirty water. So it works for all of us. So in learning what a great partner Mother Nature was for my cows, I wondered if the same principles would work with the crops. And my solution came in implementing the principles of what's known as conservation agriculture. No-till farming, or minimum disturbance of the land. A crop rotation with 3 species or more. Once again, in our case, it's corn, oats, and alfalfa. And instead of the traditional corn on corn or corn soy that we see so much in the Midwest. And the use of cover crops, keeping the ground covered. If something's green and growing, that means carbon's going into the soil where it belongs, not in the atmosphere, not in the oceans. Now, all of these have been good and beneficial practices, But we still have damage to undo and challenges to address in terms of soil loss, water quality, and habitat destruction. Now, if you look up on the side, these are prairie strips, and this is a great ecological solution developed by a pretty talented team at Iowa State. The cool thing about this practice with prairie strips, they're a very low-cost solution to actually sequester nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment, at the same time increasing habitat for wildlife and pollinators. All we're doing is putting back on Iowa what made Iowa great. We were covered with prairie until the 1850s. We have technology now that can tell us where to place these strips, and they have a tremendous, almost, we call it disproportionate benefits in their impact on the soil and water. On the technology side, we've implemented the use of precision agriculture and ag solver technology. Once again, this is the technology where it plays in, and it allows me to identify the most appropriate land to farm, the land I shouldn't farm, and it also allows me to place nutrients only where needed and when needed. You know, once again, it's not about conventional versus organic to me. We have bigger problems than that. In my mind, it's about using every tool available to deliver long-term solutions, sustainable solutions to the real problems facing our planet. I hope I drift more toward organic because I think that's an ideal, but if you have a problem, you want to be able to address it. Now, going back to strips and some of this, if we really wanted to make an impact quickly in our farm bill, when combined, no-till, cover crops, 3-species rotation, ag solver technology, and strips give us the greatest opportunity to address the carbon and nitrogen issues in our lakes and oceans in the shortest amount of time. These practices address phosphorus also, but fortunately Jeff Reuter is here as a scientist. Phosphorus is tricky, and I want him to explain this to you far more than I do. It's not quite as simple as the nitrogen and carbon issue. And then finally, we come back, and there we go. Finally, we integrate livestock back into my cropping system to extend the grazing season, build soil health, and put nutrients back where they belong. The golden rule of soil health is if you take something off, you must put something back on. And there's nothing better to put the nutrients back than a ruminant animal. And you can kind of figure out the rest on that. That is our farm now. If you look in the background, my college-educated neighbor is the one with the bare ground in the winter, but I'm a college dropout, so we'll work from there. Okay, in building this system, 3 really wonderful things happened. Number 1, I didn't go broke. By using ecological solutions, my costs decreased, my production increased, and my profits actually started to go up. The same practices that benefit my bottom line have also benefited the wild species on the farm. Restoring their populations have allowed me to add outfitting and land mitigation as additional revenue streams. And number 3, I could afford to learn how to sail and learn to explore our lakes and oceans, which has allowed me to see firsthand the impact agriculture has on these incredible places. Now, there are 3 reasons that this system is working. Number 1, we're profitable. I don't care what business you're in, there's no sustainability without profit. Number 2, we're ecologically sound. Farms are living systems. Living systems are sustained by natural resources. In my case, soil, sunlight, rainfall, and ingenuity. Living systems cannot be sustained by finite resources, fossil fuel, iron, equipment, things like that. Because over time, the cost of finite resources, if you track them, the cost of these resources far exceed the prices of the products I produce. Finite resources have increased at about 6% a year since the 1950s. The products I sell have increased at about 1.8%. You can't hang your hat on that forever. So what this means is my job as a farmer is not to produce. My job is to care for the land. And when I do this properly, the land provides for all of us. And number 3, my business is socially responsible. I'm not sure why that, oops, there it is. If you eat beef, drink water, or breathe air, we're connected. And that's actually Tatum and I on the Severn River a couple of years ago on an adventure. Once again, if you eat beef, drink water, or breathe air, we're connected in some way. Like my mother always told me, you have to think of others. And thinking of others and listening to our customers is what keeps us in business. So what do our customers want? Well, what the other 98% of the population matters to me, and if you don't listen to your customer, you don't stay in business. Our customers want drinking water quality. water quality for aquatic life, rural job opportunities, flood control, water quality for recreation, game-wide wildlife habitat, reducing greenhouse gases, tourism opportunities, crop production. Number 10, non-game wildlife habitat. I am in the outfitting business, and we have learned that bird watchers are cheap, cheap, cheap. So what are the challenges? Well, the first deals with policy. This is last year's ARC payment rates for corn. Now remember, we incentivized overproduction in the 70s. We came in with a renewable fuel standard that increased the demand by 40% for our grain. So we incentivized more artificial markets to incentivize more production. And when we get this glut of oversupply, the solution wasn't to maybe think about better practices, it was simply to give us all more money. So when I look at that, I kind of get sick to my stomach because I think of all the places the money could go. But more specifically, agriculture has to be an oversupply business. I understand the need for some subsidies, but our policy needs to incentivize the regeneration and protection of our natural resources, not their destruction. Farmers want to do the right thing, yet our current policy works against us by incentivizing a farming system that is highly reliant on finite resources. This system produces a lot of grain, yet is not profitable without government support. This system also yields numerous negative unintended consequences: decimated soil health, water pollution, habitat loss, rural poverty, chronic disease, and saddest of all, entitlements like this destroy our most important natural resource, human ingenuity. The farming practices I've shared today protect our water, reduce our carbon footprint, improve the resilience and productivity of our soil, restore wildlife, and create better life for everything from the headwaters to the oceans. And like I said again, there are so many real needs for this money in this world. I'm not sure I need to be subsidized for doing the right thing. I just want us to stop subsidizing the wrong things. The second challenge we face is research. To stay in business, I have to be a seeker of the truth. It's critical that I have access to high-quality information that isn't skewed by self-interest or political ideology. This requires a couple of key things. First, business and government need to allow the scientists and researchers at our land-grant institutions and USDA to do their jobs without fear of budget cuts and criticism when research reveals we need to do things differently. Public funding has a unique role to play in supporting research that truly supports the public good. But we also need to recognize that public funding has been in decline and private funds can help fill those gaps. So we also need to find ways to privately fund and support research and outreach. So as a farmer, I have access to the information I need. We have the tools, technology, science, skills, and people to build a food system that will regenerate our oceans and our natural resources, that will provide clean water and healthy food for our citizens, and allow us to maintain our high productivity while reducing our reliance on chemicals, fossil fuel, and fertilizer. It just takes all of us, public servants, farmers, fishermen, advocates, scientists, and researchers working together toward a common goal of stewardship. And with this, I just say thank you for helping us protect the things we love, the land, the sea, and our future. Not only am I more a farmer than a speaker, I'm also not a professional moderator, but at this point I'd like to ask our panel to come forward and I'll introduce everyone. Like I said today, I'm very lucky to have some really great people, and I want them to share mostly about what they do, but I'm going to do a brief introduction and then call upon them one at a time with a little bit of a leading question and then turn it over to the pros. So going across at the end is Vicki Goldstein. Vicki runs the Inland Ocean Coalition. She originally grew up on the East Coast and I do want to learn more about hauling around whale bones, but we're going to find out about what that means. But she somehow wound up in Boulder, Colorado, and brought that passion with her. So I'm looking forward to hearing more of what she has to say. Next is April Weigard with the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. And maybe I shouldn't say this here, but I'm a fourth-generation Republican, so I think it's pretty cool that Theodore Roosevelt's legacy is still here, but we have to work on it. I'm sorry, I went in the wrong way, Ariel. So next, they're out of order. Next is Jeff Reuter. Jeff was the director of the Ohio Sea Grant and Stone Laboratories. He has incredible experience in all of this. And then Bryn Smith, who runs the Thimble Island Ocean Farm and is the founder of the nonprofit Green Wave. I'd like to start with introducing Jeff. Get this right. In Cowboy Talk, Jeff, this isn't your first rodeo. What is happening and what do we need to do? What have we learned about the impact of nutrient runoff in agriculture when it comes to our Great Lakes and oceans?
Yeah, thanks very much, Seth. And honestly, that was a tremendous talk. If all the farmers were following your lead, we really wouldn't have the problems that we're having. What you see in front of you right now is my hand. This is when I first started working on the Great Lakes. I'm a grad student at this point. That's in front of Stone Laboratory on Gibraltar Island up at Put in Bay. That's Ohio State University's marine laboratory. I'm glad you didn't ask me anything about how I started this laboratory, because this is the oldest freshwater biological field station in the country. It started in 1895, so I wasn't around at that point. In those days, Lake Erie was considered the dead lake. We were the poster child for pollution problems in the country. The Cuyahoga River had burned in '69, and you think about the things that led to. The very next year, US EPA was formed, NOAA was formed, we have the first Earth Day. A year later, Environment and Climate Change Canada is formed, sort of the Canadian version of US EPA. 1972, in April, Nixon and Trudeau signed the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. That allows the scientists to come together, binational teams, and we identify targets. What do we need to do to solve the problems? A year after that, we have, that fall, Nixon signs the Clean Water Act, and that gives us the tools to regulate really the sewage treatment plants. If I could see the next slide. This is my hand now in front of Stone Laboratory, but in 2013. The arm's a little older, the watch is better, but the problems are back. Between times, we went from being really the poster child for pollution problems to the walleye capital. We solved that problem by reducing the amount of phosphorus by 60%, and that was almost entirely by improving sewage treatment. We were focused on about 20 sewage treatment plants. The problem that you see today, this is microcystis, a harmful algal bloom producing toxins, causing water treatment problems. This is driven about 85% by agricultural runoff. So instead of dealing with 20 sewage treatment plants, we're dealing with thousands of farmers. And if I could see the next slide. You see the giant blooms. This bloom moved out of the Western Basin, covered the water intakes for 2.8 million people. So that's really where we are today, Seth. We're back in many ways to where we were in the 1970s. We know that reducing phosphorus, in the 70s we had to reduce it by 60%. Our targets today are a 40% reduction, but I would argue it's a different challenge because instead of focusing on the point sources, we're now focusing on the non-point sources or agricultural runoff, and we have less tools available to control agricultural runoff.
Okay, thank you. Ariel, you're next. How does the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership address these issues, and share with how they matter to sportsmen?
Sure, yeah, thanks. And thank you to the association also for bringing everyone together. This is just a really impressive week and a great collection of speakers, and we're really happy to be a part of it. The Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, for those of you who aren't familiar, which is probably most of you, was created back in 2002 by a guy named Jim Range, who was a longtime political operative here in DC who worked on conservation issues. And he was also a hunter and an angler, and he saw the hunting and angling organizations like Ducks Unlimited and Trout Unlimited, Pheasants Forever, groups that you may have heard of, saw them coming into Congress and asking for things and winning small battles, but sort of losing the war for conservation. And that was very frustrating for him. So he started this organization to bring all of these different groups together under one banner to fight for the things that we all care about. Today, TRCP is a coalition of 54 national hunting, angling, and outdoor recreation organizations that work together to guarantee all Americans quality places to hunt and fish. That's our mission and our motto. And I guess that gets to the second part of your question, which is why do sportsmen care about this stuff? Why do we care about nutrient pollution? Well, it's all about access. It's about those quality places to hunt and fish. You know, when Lake Erie closes because of toxic algae blooms, when the Everglades, waters outside the Everglades close because of toxic algae blooms, that keeps our fishermen from getting into the water and enjoying quality days afield. You know, and when people stop fishing, they stop buying fishing equipment. They stop buying boats and renting boats and contracting with outfitters and going to the mom and pop diner that's right at the headwaters where they're going to put in their boats. And that has real implications for these communities that depend on recreation, depend on tourism. And we just don't want to see that happen. So that's what we do. We work on federal policies. We work with Congress. We work with agencies like NOAA and the U.S. Department of Agriculture to make sure there are laws and policies that support these days afield, and really, when we talk about agriculture, that support our farmers. You know, the type of work that you're doing is incredibly important work, and we don't want to stop that. You know, we're certainly not opposed to agriculture. In fact, many of our farmers and ranchers and foresters, they are our most avid sportsmen, so we really want to keep those people happy. But we want to make sure that there's a balance and that production agriculture is not incentivizing the types of waters that we were just looking at in the images above.
I want to follow everyone in order just right, but while it's fresh in my mind, we've seen on the farm the impact outfitting has had, and it's also been an incentive for me to work even harder on doing the right thing. Just really quickly, what is the economic impact, so everyone understands, because I don't think they see this sometimes. What's the economic impact of outdoor recreation?
It's big. It's really big. So there was recently a report that came out. It was issued by the Outdoor Industry Association, which is a partner of ours, and it noted that all outdoor recreation combined generates about $887 billion a year in consumer spending and leads to 7.6 million American jobs. I mean, that's really nothing to shake a stick at. That's a huge amount. And when you consider, all kinds of recreation, not just hunting and angling, but water activities like scuba diving, there are more people in America who participate in outdoor recreation than go to NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, and NHL games combined every year. So this is an incredible constituency. There's a huge economic impact, and that's something that we should really be able to tap into to get the sort of laws and policies that we need to make sure that we have wildlife and wild places and clean water to drink and enjoy.
Very good. Bren, I guess we're both kind of farmers.
Yeah.
And anyway, how does ocean farming help reduce the impacts of land-based farming, and what does it look like? I want to hear your story.
Yeah. So you dropped out of high school. You dropped out of college. I dropped out of high school.
Cool.
Good luck to our kids, right?
Don't listen, Tatum.
Just to give a little context, I started fishing when I was 14 years old. I fished all over the globe, Bering Sea, Gloucester, Grand Banks. And if I look at the arc of my life, it's been one of trying to figure out how do I make a living on the ocean when my living is dependent on ecological health. And I didn't realize that when I was young. But when the cod stocks crashed in Newfoundland, where I was born, thousands of people thrown out of work. And that's where we begin to see, wow, there are going to be no jobs on a dead planet. And then when my oyster farm was wiped out by Hurricane Irene, Hurricane Sandy, the same thing. And so the challenge for all of us who want to run small businesses, I want to die in my boat one day. That's going to be sort of my metric of success. And is how do we make a living on a living planet? It's not jobs versus environment, it's that my livelihood depends on a healthy planet. So that's the nexus. So for the last 15 years, we've been experimenting out there trying to figure out what could the future of ocean farming look like to create jobs, to breathe life back into our seas, and to feed the planet at scale, right? Let's not do these little Brooklyn bee farms on roofs. Let's grow a whole lot of food. So here's real quick, here's a picture of the farm. Had a high school kid draw this. And it's really just hurricane-proof anchors on the edges and then some rope down below the surface. I mean, one of the great things about the ocean is that you don't have to fight gravity. And if you grow the right species, you don't have to feed, fertilize, or water. So this just makes the economics really strong for those of us that small scale. So we're just trying to grow as many species as possible in these small areas using the whole water column. Think of it as a polyculture, sort of sea basket approach of the sea. So next slide. Next slide. Anybody? So here are the crops we're growing, and we pick these for very specific reasons, right? So we've got kelp, we've got our mussels, oysters, clams, and we do scallops. Our kelp soaks up 5 times more carbon than land-based plants. It's called the sequoia of the sea. Our mussels are these great lean proteins packed full of omega-3s. They filter nitrogen out of the water column, as do oysters and clams. We grow only restorative species because my job is not just to be sustainable, but to meet sort of the climate crisis and the ecological crisis we've faced with proactive solutions. So keep polluting. I mean, this is the funny thing, right? I mean, I'm completely joking because we're polluting too much, but we got one part of the country that has a very expensive thing they need called fertilizer, and then the other part of the country has this pollutant of nitrogen. We turn our kelp into fertilizers. So you pollute, we're going to sell it back to you. But this is the beginning. I mean, of course, we want to reduce nitrogen outflows and carbon outflows. But this building a bridge between land and sea, like our thinking of the food system stops at the water's edge. And that's just insane. We are fully connected, and we need to think through. We use our crops for animal feeds. And as much as we can grow zero-input food in the ocean and replace land-based inputs, the better it is for the entire system. Just real quick, last slide. So here's the farm from the surface, and for oceans people, this is key. I used to work, after I left the wild fisheries, I was on the aquaculture farms in northern Canada, the salmon farms. Really although they've gotten much better at that time in the 90s, we were really, it was Iowa pig farms at sea. I don't mean to be insulting of Iowa. But here, we've designed our farms so there's not much to see. And that's really important, like low aesthetic impact, so our oceans stay these beautiful, pristine places, and anybody can boat and swim over our farm. So we've created this community place, the best fishing in the entire area is on our farm, and it's scalable. If you were to create a network of our farms totaling the size of Washington State, you could feed the world. If you took 5% of US territorial waters and create 50 million direct jobs. So this is about scale in the era of climate change, creating a climate farming system to create a new climate cuisine and really build a bridge between land and sea.
Wow, that's cool. We got to hang out more. Vicki, all the things we've talked about today, we all have, we're all passionate about getting our things done. But unless someone can help us communicate and help people understand the issue, a lot of it's for naught, for lack of better words. So, we've talked about farmers, we've talked about policy, but to really impact change, people have to be aware of these issues and understand them. And I guess I'd like to, going backward a little bit, I'd like to understand more about the Inland Ocean Coalition and, how you came to form it, how it evolved, and how it does help us understand what's going on. And that's trying to give like a 5-part question. But.
Thanks a lot. That's
Yeah.
a biggie. Well, the inland ocean, I think the whole idea of this land-to-sea stewardship really started a long, long time ago. And when I was running my nonprofits and doing my ocean conservation work on the East Coast, when I worked for NOAA, and then when I ran Save Our Shores on the West Coast, there was always this question: how do you really instill this sense of community and engagement when people leave the coast and they go back to Colorado, to Kansas, to Iowa? And it was something I've been thinking about for many, many years. And then I had the fantastic opportunity to really delve into it when my husband was given a job offer at CU, University of Colorado, in a tenure track position. And that meant the whole family was moving. And then when you think about tenure, that's a long, long time. So I'm like, oh my gosh, you're taking me to the middle of the country. So I moved to Boulder. We all moved to Boulder. And I started thinking about, do you really need to see the ocean to protect it? Why can't I take my personal passion and my interest and my background and really try to do something about this land-to-sea connection, something that we've been talking about for many, many years? So it started out with a very casual gathering of people called a Blue Drinks at a local bar, and invited people, and about 30 showed up. And I'm thinking, really, all these? That's really cool. And there were divers and CU and UCAR scientists, a number of people, and we started talking about what can we do. And then that evolved. And we took a group back to Washington, D.C. for the Blue Vision Summit and had an opportunity to talk with Sylvia Earle, Dr. Earle, her deepness, and she said, wow, what a neat idea to have a Colorado Ocean Coalition, because that's where we started. And she said, I'd love to come help you celebrate your 1-year anniversary. And I thought, I can't just, bring Dr. Earle to a bar. So we worked together as a community to create an event called Making Waves. So she came out, and then all these other wonderful ocean heroes wanted to be involved, and they asked if they could come out and participate. So fast forward, we had Making Waves for a number of years, and we incorporated a film festival about oceans, and then we eventually brought in a dive show, and people just started working together and developing community. So moving forward, I started having other people say, well, I love what is going on in Colorado. I love the Blue Drinks and the film showings and the fact that you have community around oceans and water. We want to start something up as well. So we had Great Lakes Ocean Coalition started up and Utah, but then they started feeling really awkward. They're like, do we really have to come under Colorado? That just doesn't feel right. So that's the inspiration for us changing from the Colorado Ocean Coalition to the Inland Ocean Coalition. And as we were doing that, we developed a program called the Ocean Ambassadors Program, which we did get some funding from the foundation, the Sanctuary Foundation. And then we realized that that was taking a great deal of time for our volunteers in coordination. So we had to shrink it a little bit. So now we have an Ocean Rangers program that we train volunteers 2 or 3 times a year. And they come in and they learn all about ocean acidification and how, if you live inland, how our fossil fuel use really contributes to that. And then how do we solve that particular problem? And we also cover plastic pollution, sustainable seafood. So in essence, what we're doing inland is really very similar to what we do on the coast. We are teaching people about cultural changes, shifts, how they can be involved in educating others. We're facilitating partnerships. So now these programs that we've put together in Colorado are now able to go out into the other chapters. So they're tools for other groups who are starting these types of things, these types of programs. And so now we have 7 chapters because COCO, Colorado Ocean Coalition, is now a chapter. And people are really getting excited and are working on initiatives, creating great partnerships, and it's been super exciting to have that kind of energy. And it really is a community-based approach. as opposed to just, signing a petition, which we do get involved in petitions. We're always trying to figure out what's happening out on the policy level, bringing that back to our community. So they're engaging in different types of acts like reauthorizations or petitions, but they're also getting together and working on their watersheds and forming their partnerships. And really, it's about igniting community engagement. So we're really working forward now to support the chapters, to really help them with tools that we've been developing. And we're just super excited to have this idea of an inland ocean coalition, really a land to sea stewardship ethic moving through different regions in the middle of the country.
That's pretty neat.
And you still didn't ask me about my whales.
Well, you know what? I have to know, because when I read your biography, I'm like, this is just fascinating. So what is the deal with the whale?
Oh, right, the whales.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're all dying to know, right?
So I went to college in Maine, and after getting my degree in human ecology and marine biology, I was the marine mammal stranding coordinator. And so I got to travel all around New England, looking at dead whales and marine mammals and taking necropsies and getting involved with tissue samples. But at the same time, I also was directing a natural history museum. And we had a program called Whales on Wheels, which was a 20-foot minke whale skeleton that we were able to collect from the beach, cut up, and put into the bug house.
Is that like a Oscar Mayer hot dog mobile gone bad?
Kind of, yeah. Big old bones. And then we would do, I taught at the college, so the idea was we'd scatter the bones all around the floor, talk about what whales need, what humans need, we're all mammals. And then they would put together the skeleton like a big puzzle, and I traveled all over Canada and New England with my whale skeleton.
All right.
So that was how I was hauling whale bones
The whale
around
mobile.
New England.
Cool beans.
So I've been doing a lot of ocean conservation, ocean education since my very early days. So you can see why when I moved to Colorado, I'm like, I can't give this up. This is so much part of me.
So, this is kind of a question for everyone, but on the subject of education, I see this with agriculture. Often, many of us are 3 or 4 generations removed from the land. And where I'm going with this, that last picture of Tatum was actually at the Ding Darling National Wildlife Refuge. And my feelings are, it's absolutely critical to find ways to expose young people to the outdoors, whether it's bringing up new fishermen or ocean farmers, whether it's just to have that. I think it's in our DNA, but if we're not reminded of it, it's not a good situation. So a couple of concerns. Number one, maybe some of you could explain a little bit about what's going on with our national wildlife refuges, our ocean sanctuaries, and at the same time, if you have anything to share on ways you're exposing young people to our natural resources, if you could expand a little bit. And then I see a lot of people bringing in note cards. So got a couple other questions. Whoever wants to start.
I can talk about ways we're trying to reach young people and how that's changed over the years. When I first got involved with Stone Laboratory, we were primarily doing college-level courses for upper-level undergrads and grad students. Over the years, we've changed, and we now do courses at an introductory level, bringing in undergraduate students and even superior high school students, allowing them to get college credit while they're still in high school. We also we formed our Center for Lake Erie Area Research, or CLEAR, to do more focused research on coastal problems, not just Lake Erie problems, but also problems that would be very similar to what we have on the oceans. And then when we got our Sea Grant program, it allowed us to further expand our outreach and education to the young people, but now bringing in for workshops, 2-day workshops, kids as young as 5th graders. And then we expanded to have coastal county commissioner, mayor, and decision makers days, and congressional days on Lake Erie, and state legislature days, and science writers workshops. We do about 250 of these each year now, bring through a lot of programs. I always kid the congressional delegation, tell them they really get the same thing that the 5th graders get, except we just tone it down a little bit for the congressional delegation. But it's the idea to expand that, and now bringing in farmers. I think it was Franklin that said, tell me I forget, show me I remember, involve me I understand. So we'll take out farmers out on our research boats and show them the problems so they see it. And they rapidly, and this gets back to when we're managing our resources, the Great Lakes, any of our water bodies, the problems that we're seeing are not, Ohio or Great Lakes. These are worldwide problems. We see these harmful algal blooms or dead zones or excessive or nuisance algal blooms. These are really the primary things that the excessive algae or the excessive nutrient loading causes all over the world. We need to show people how significant their impact is and give them solutions to that impact. I think we've been able to pretty effectively do that with the farming community. They're rapidly buying into it, and there are a lot more people doing the kinds of things that you're doing, Seth. We simply need to expand that further.
Could I just say something real quick, which is, you can either try to, just in our experience, you can either try to get people to care about the oceans and marine sanctuaries. We come in a little differently. We say, what are folks caring about now? And we're at a time with economic insecurity, young people not having a lot of opportunity, everybody scared about climate change, and also sort of really grasping for a sense of meaning and doing things of value, like growing food. This is why we have so many young land-based farmers coming to us to start farms, because they can't afford land, but our farms only cost $20,000 to start up. It's a low barrier to entry. But if we mix that, that in order to grow beautiful food, in order to create opportunity and have something to pass on to your kids as you grow up, we need to protect our seas. We need to think through a conservation strategy to do that. That's been our way in, and it's just been sort of resonating. Because people don't care about the oceans. I can just tell you, I go to conferences all the time, food conferences, and we'll do a session on seafood, and there'll be like 8 people. And it'll be famous chefs like Barton Seaver and all these people, but no one will show up, and it's a 3-day conference. People just can't see what's below. There's a small sector that really care about it. The question is how to break through on that, and I think this land...
You'll have to come to Colorado.
Yeah.
We love the ocean.
Yeah.
So one of the ways that the hunting and angling community is working on breaking through is through food and getting people interested and involved. To your point, if you involve me, I'll understand. To get people involved in the outdoors and in caring about these resources through the most organic cuisine you can find, a wild deer or a fresh caught fish from the ocean. And that's really important that we're engaging young people that way. The fastest growing segments of the sportsman's community are young people. They're millennials. They're women who are concerned about where their food is coming from. And this is of vital importance for conservation in this country. One of the things that most people don't realize is that hunters and anglers are really paying for much of the conservation that happens in this country. There are taxes on the equipment that they buy that goes directly into a federal fund that pays for conservation. Every time a hunter or a fisherman buys a license from the state, that money goes back to the state for them to protect and restore and enhance farmland that's good for pheasants, or to repair waterways that have been degraded. And so the number of hunters and anglers in this country is declining. And so it's very, very important that we recruit people and we find those messaging points, when it comes to good food and things like farming that they care about, in order to, kind of shore up our conservation fund and our conservation resources so that we really have the resources available to do the things that we need to do for our waters.
I think working with youth is really important, and we've put together a Youth Ocean Rangers program that's being shared, and we have great partnerships. One of our partnerships is with NOAA, their National Marine Sanctuary Program, as their inland ocean partner, and we are working with teachers right now to bring inland kids to the Florida Keys, and then also to bring them to the California coast. And then we are working with our chapter, our university chapter, in Colorado, so there's a lot of youth around that. And if you have a chance, you should go to our website. There's a really funny video that they put together on microbeads last year, and they did a little rap. But working in the area of colleges, and we do a lot of collaborations. We're going to be bringing Chasing Coral to the university, and the students are going to be the ones coordinating that. And then we're fortunate to have Jeff Orlasky living in Boulder, so he'll be part of that event, and a couple of the other people who are in that film. So it's really reaching out, giving them an opportunity to take a leadership role in the activities that we're doing, and that's the neat thing about the Inland Ocean Coalition. We provide kind of a general framework, but in order for this to grow and be successful, it really does entail people coming in and coming up with ideas, being creative, and then running with that. So that's been a real positive thing to move this dial and really get the younger generation involved. We even did an event recently where it was for middle school in Fort Collins, and then a couple of the other ninth graders took the day off school to come in to do a video and to take photographs. But again, even getting those high school kids to take a leadership role in documenting the day's events. So that's just kind of a theme that we really try to stay focused on: engagement, opportunities, and leadership.
One of the things I thought about, we don't get opportunities to talk to decision makers. You know, you guys are kind of the headwaters of policy. In Iowa, my customers, the big customers, Walmart and McDonald's and people that buy my beef, want sustainability in the supply chain. Walmart's made a commitment to take a gigaton of carbon out of the atmosphere by 2030. Now, to find these solutions, I can keep going by trial and error, but I really rely heavily on our universities and our land grants and some of the research centers. In Iowa, our Leopold Center was denied funding by our legislature this year. Our governor kept it open, but it's not funded. What issues are you running into on funding with what you do? And you know, for me, once again, losing the Leopold Center would be a bad deal. And I guess maybe if you can share a little, Jeff or Ariel or whoever.
My big concerns right now are elimination of the Sea Grant College program, elimination of the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. This is during the Bush administration. In the Great Lakes area, we put together a plan. What would it take to restore the Great Lakes? It was about a $20 billion effort. Funding for that started under the Obama administration. Spent about $2 billion so far. Huge successes in that program. In the Sea Grant program, for many years I served on ORAP, was the president of the National Association of Marine Laboratories. Sea Grant, within our program, and as you go around the country, it really allowed us to target our research on real world problems and become a tremendous example for getting federal research or federally funded research applied rapidly. With loss of EPA, we would not, Lake Erie would not have gone from the poster child for pollution problems to the walleye capital of the world were it not for US EPA. And if there's a bill in front of Congress right now that would eliminate EPA, another bill that would reduce the funding to it, eliminate 3,000 people, big problems for me, worries for me. Now I'm near the end of my career at this point, but I look back and I think these Cuyahoga River burns, EPA is formed, huge improvements go on. NOAA is formed. We lose our coastal management program. That would be one of the things that would be cut. National Estuarine Reserve program would be cut. Many other things. Reductions to almost every federal agency. And the federal funding that's spent on all of these agencies that I'm talking about right now is minuscule. Just minuscule. So very, very disappointing. And all of this at a time that we're seeing harmful algal blooms come back, and at a time when our research has shown that, in freshwater, we're concerned about phosphorus. In saltwater, we're concerned primarily about nitrogen. We know that they're both important in both places. In freshwater, it's the amount of nitrogen that tells us which harmful algal bloom we get, and it tells us how toxic that bloom's going to be. Because the toxins that they produce that are more toxic than cyanide are 14% nitrogen by weight. So you can have a harmful algal bloom and hold back on the nitrogen, and that bloom will not become as toxic as it would have been with a big load of nitrogen. So we're having all these problems, and yet we're seeing concern or efforts, suggestions that the budget be cut. typically these things have received strong bipartisan support. I'm really hopeful that the congressional delegations put these back in, but those are very big concerns for me right now. Toledo, I don't want to see Lake Erie come back to a pristine situation. Lake Erie's never been pristine. We produce more fish for human consumption out of Lake Erie than any of the other Great Lakes, even though we're the smallest. Lake Superior is 30 times larger than Lake Erie by volume. Shallow, warm, nutrient-rich, tremendous fishery. Typically, 50% of the fish, or often 50% of the fish that come out of the Great Lakes come out of Lake Erie, even though it's only 2% of the water. So it's a very productive fish. But when you put in too many nutrients, then you start getting too much algae, wrong kinds of algae. Our goal is to keep ag production high, keep the nutrients on the field. We're not going to be able to do those things with the kind of budget cuts that are being suggested.
Maybe, I don't know if I should ask this question here or not, but I've wanted to since I left. I mentioned I'm a Republican. I base that legacy on men like Ding Darling and Teddy Roosevelt that recognized the importance of our natural resources and that they must be preserved. How do we get from their legacy to drill, baby, drill?
Is that a question?
That's a question. If anyone has comments, I'll
I
take
think it has
them.
something to do with the voting process.
So anyway, if any of you can help us get back to what we love, I'm asking.
I mean, really impossible, complicated question.
Yeah.
Well, let's say that since the 80s in the fishing community, as we've had this struggle between creating economic opportunity, rising poverty, job loss, people losing their livelihoods with conservation regulation, and that battle there has really changed the politics in my communities. Because people have been, and this is true in the coal communities in Kentucky, all different places, being forced to choose between jobs and the environment has just completely changed I think the political terrain in this country. You had Nixon Clean Water Act, the Clean Water Act is why I'm able to farm at this point, and sort of capitalizing on that friction. And so we work with our folks a lot, talking about, listen, that's a false choice. And that's been the Achilles heel of the environmental movement, which save the whales, but screw the fishermen. But no, it's not like we need that. This is an opportunity to create a marine sanctuary, have ocean farms there, breathing life back into the marine sanctuaries, things like that. We need to look for solutions that don't divide workers and folks just trying to make a living with environmentalists.
It's kind of like we commented earlier. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ariel.
No, I was just going to chime in. You mentioned the Farm Bill earlier, and that's one of the main drivers of not only agricultural production, but conservation in this country. And that's really a very unique place where it's not a partisan bit of legislation. This is one of the very few things that happens here in DC where Republicans and Democrats want to work together. And it's more of a regional battle. You've got the Midwest versus the South. It's more urban-rural. You've got the big cities versus the rural areas. But it's not partisan. And so, I do think that maybe the Republican Party has strayed a little bit from, having conservation and conservative being tied together. But when we talk about farm policy and some of the things that we're discussing today, there is a bright spot. And I think that a lot of the Republicans in Congress are aware of the incredible importance of research, agricultural research, not only to improve the profitability of our farms, but to also make them more environmentally friendly. There's a lot of pressure from regulation and from the states and just from our society to do better, to clean up our waterways, to make sure that wildlife habitat continues, to exist in these really heavily developed areas. And the Republicans would much rather see voluntary actions taken by our farmers, ranchers, foresters. They would much rather see USDA provide a little bit of funding to help you plant that prairie strip than they would like to see the Clean Water Act, come down and levy a huge fine on top of these folks. And so Again, we may have strayed, the Republicans may have strayed a little bit here, but at the end of the day, there really is an opportunity to drive some really incredible conservation outcomes and to work with the Republicans in Congress to do that.
I want to make sure I get the audience's questions, and I've got, these guys know I have like a million questions for them, but we only have an hour and a half. So anyway, this one, they're all good. And the first one came out is actually directed to Bren. How is Bren reaching other mass fishing industries, companies, et cetera, to share his work? What is the reception for his production style from his peers?
Well, I was laughed off the water for growing vegetables. We kill for things for a living. I've been hunting and chasing and killing. I club baby seals. That's I'm one of those folks, and and I can't go to the same bars I used to. I have to go hang out with arugula farmers. It's an embarrassing shift. But we had at the same time. We just had a meeting down not too long ago, and 40 fishermen showed up. Lobstermen, 11th generation fishermen, because there's just not much going on in the water right now for a whole bunch of complex regions. So we have requests to start farms at every coastal state in North America at this point. Literally thousands of people have written to us asking. Because they feel like they can do it, because it's like the nail salon model of the sea. It requires minimal capital requirements. And so we work with Google, Patagonia, big seafood distributors, things like that. We're building a new 15,000 square foot seafood hub, which is actually now a soil and sea food hub, right? It's actually, we're going to physically manifest this this collaboration, joint CSF, CSAs, things like that. And how do we break down what a farmer and a fisherman is? So we're interested in, okay, let's have our farmer farming kelp in the winter and doing mushroom and shipping containers the rest of the year, things like that. Again, every stage we can think through our food system, our food economy, our business models, and just try to keep building that bridge.
Very good. This is kind of along the lines, I don't know, I'll let you all kind of address it. It might be kind of an Ariel's area. Do you have any advice on how to make funding for conservation and research less of a polarizing political issue, which we touched on a little bit earlier, and more of a human issue that needs to be addressed? I guess I'd chip in. Like when our hunters come, we learned early on in the outfitting business, it's not about killing the big deer, it's about making a memory. So there's just a little thought that whoever wants to take up.
Gosh, well, I guess, for my part, I would reiterate what I already said. I think focusing on the outcomes is really important. When we're talking about research, agricultural research, it's not politically, that's not politically charged. Our farmers are Republicans and Democrats, and they're in all regions of this country, and we all want them to succeed. We all need, we need to feed the world. America needs to feed the world. And so focusing on how we can improve their operations, not just for them and for their businesses, but for the communities that they live in, for the people who maybe recreate on their lands. I think that's the way to do it. It's looking at the outcomes and not the process. It's politicizing the process that becomes troublesome. If it's, you're asking for funding for climate change, which is an inherently charged topic, that's a little bit different from saying we need to help our farmers, mitigate their nutrient runoff, which is something that's a very real and tangible threat. And so I think a lot of it just has to do with the messaging and who the messengers are. But that's a tough topic. That's a very tough question.
I also just want to toss in a little bit about the National Marine Sanctuary Program. And it is a multiple use, so there is fishing, there's some extraction. But these are just national treasures in our sea. And I think by promoting those and trying to get people out to those sites, also to talk about them inland and help people understand the value and the importance and the fact that they are part of the blue economy, and continue to support their efforts is a nice way to integrate what we're trying to do, because it really is a great resource. There are so many neat things that can happen within a marine sanctuary, the beauty, the conservation, again, some of the extraction things, and that doesn't get out enough to the communities.
This next question, I think, is kind of, you're talking about your blue drink parties. So this might deal with an appetizer to go with it. It's kind of Bryn and Vicky. Can we make things like eating seafood more appealing to Americans? Would a change like this in our food stuff have a positive environmental impact, which you've already shown it does? But yeah, if you guys can elaborate a little, that'd be wonderful.
I think there's quite a bit of seafood eating, and I think the real question is, how do you take that concept and educate people so when they're eating the seafood, they're eating sustainable seafood? So we've partnered with the Monterey Bay Aquarium, where we distribute the seafood cards. We've kind of co-branded them with our regions, and we oftentimes will team up with a chef and team up with some kind of a sustainable seafood and have the blue drinks. But I think part of it is really trying to do it in a social way, in a sustainable way, but also part of this whole idea of understanding where these things are coming from is to enjoy them and celebrate them. So it's interesting because there's a lot of seafood that is distributed all around the country, and in most of the restaurants I go to, I see them, but the real problem is there is not enough of the sustainable education information out there, so when people want to eat, they can feel good about what they're eating if it comes out of the sea.
We're working with Google and other places trying to figure out how to reimagine the seafood plate and really move plants to the center and bivalves to the center and wild fish to the edges, just like folks are doing on land with beef and things like that. I think seafood is really confusing to the American public. They look at the guides and it's just dizzying. They get nauseous and order chicken, right? Which is actually much less sustainable, even if it's a farm salmon in terms of water inputs and carbon footprint and stuff like that. We have to understand that piece of it. I think we grow not very tasty things, right? I grow seaweeds. Who wants to eat that? What's great is there are two trends happening. One is, we're at the height of sort of culinary renaissance in America. I give my seaweeds to my chefs who are like pastry chefs in New York, and they'll do barbecue kelp noodles with parsnips and breadcrumbs. Sells out every night. So that genius and creativity to the plate. And that's why when we go to an area to create a farm, we meet with scientists, chefs, ocean planners, stakeholders, yacht club. That's the coalition we need as we move out in the ocean. But the other trend that's happening, our food system is being pushed out to sea. California water wars clearly shown that. Our wild fisheries can't handle that. There's going to be a climate economy as water prices go up, fertilizer and feed prices go up. That climate economy is going to force us to eat zero input food. So I don't know if anybody's going to eat what I'm growing now. 20, 30 years from now, anybody who's growing sort of really low cost, affordable food to farm and then to sell and passing that on consumer is going to dominate the plate.
Jeff, one of the things you talked about earlier was that we need to make a 40% reduction in phosphorus inputs going into the lake. But you also alluded we can almost predict what the algae blooms will be each year. Is that correct?
Yeah, that prediction comes out of NOAA. Our prediction this year will be on July 13th. Typically, the blooms reach their peak in late August and September. Since 2012, we've been able to make very accurate forecasts of how severe the bloom will be. And basically, the 40% reduction that I talk about, to address harmful algal blooms, we need to reduce the amount of phosphorus that comes in. It's just about any body of water, but I'll use Lake Erie as the example. 40% reduction in the spring, and spring defined as 1 March till the end of July. So if we reduce that amount of phosphorus, and this is both total phosphorus or particulate phosphorus and dissolved reactive phosphorus, it's the dissolved phosphorus that is really causing the problem. That's new information for most farmers. Almost all of our ag practices and our CS activities have focused on keeping or reducing soil loss. And I love to take farmers out on the lake and grab a bottom sample and have them stick their hands in it and tell them there's no such thing as soil loss. I know right where it is. But the idea of reducing that load in the spring. That addresses harmful algal blooms. The load annually is what determines the size of the dead zone in the Central Basin. That often reaches 3,000 square miles. So it's a significant area. These reductions, or that spring load, literally NOAA has been able to develop a 10-point scale that is very similar to the hurricane forecast. So you'll see a Category 5 hurricane. Last year's bloom was about a 3. The bloom in 2011 that I showed on the screen earlier, the giant one, that was a 10. The bloom in 2015, we thought the 2011 bloom would be the biggest they would get. The bloom in 2015 was a 10.5. This year's bloom right now, based on the load, the amount of phosphorus that has come in out of the Maumee River, and that's what we use as our target load, this year's is predicted somewhere between a 6 and an 8. And as it keeps raining, the amount of phosphorus that comes in grows. When you think about it, if I say that 85% of the phosphorus coming in is coming in from ag runoff, then you have to recognize that it really is determined by how much it rains. If we have a very wet year, you're going to have likely a large load coming in. If it's not raining, there's no runoff from agriculture. Whereas when you look at your point sources, your sewage treatment, I don't think there's anybody in the audience here that flushes their toilet more when it's raining. Typically, that load is very constant, but the ag load is dependent on how much rain you get. So if you have a drought year, we get a small bloom. Wet year, large bloom.
Vicki, you talked about national ocean monuments, and this question comes from the audience. It's pretty specific, but I think it's one from Vicki and Ariel both. But what role in terms of reaching new partners who can reach inland senators and representatives do you see non-coastal organizations playing when the public comment period is announced next week on the review of many of our national marine sanctuaries?
Well, you can't just let the coastal communities carry the load. So that's one of our big goals and has been. So we have relationships with our legislative leaders. We always take a delegation to DC from our inland communities, and then we encourage participation on a state level. So we will be reaching out to our chapters, to our House reps and our senators, and using our social media to get community engagement around what's happening with the monuments, and we have been, but also around the National Marine Sanctuary situation. Right now, we don't even have a real handle on what's going on with the sanctuaries as far as which ones are going to be reviewed. So unless there's new information, we're still waiting. But really, it's a matter of getting the word out that there will be reviews on these sanctuaries, that they're very valuable, and using the network that we've already created, along with our other partners and collaborators. I think we really need to work all together on this one. Nobody can pull this one off on their own, as with many of the other issues that we're facing. So it's networking, reaching out, and being very clear in your communications with those folks up on the Hill.
Yeah, in addition to the marine sanctuaries, as you mentioned, we don't have a whole lot of information about what they're going to be looking at there. We can talk about what they're looking at with monuments, though. Mm-hmm. Back in April, President Trump issued an executive order that the Secretary of Interior should review 27 national monuments going back to, I believe, 1996. And just yesterday, Interior Secretary Zinke sent a memo back to the president recommending that we reduce the size of Bears Ears National Monument in Utah. So this is one of our newest monuments. He said we need to right-size it, which, I think a lot of different stakeholders can appreciate the rationale there. These monuments are in communities where people live and work and need to develop industries. But this would also set a pretty overwhelming precedent. No president has ever changed the size of a monument set by another president to the degree that we're talking about now. And it has the potential to jeopardize our monuments going all the way back to the Teddy Roosevelt era.
And we know that there are 5 of the marine monuments included.
5
in
of the
that
marine monuments are
executive order.
included in that, yep. And so there's a comment period now that's open. Would encourage you all to go to regulations.gov and look it up and write into the Interior Department with your thoughts and concerns. But as you mentioned, definitely call your senators and representatives. TRCP feels strongly that if we're going to be changing the size of these monuments, if we're going to be rescinding any of these monuments, absolutely, this should really go through Congress. And, calling your representatives and letting them know that you feel that way as well, that we think the American people need to have a say in how these public resources, which we all own, this land is your land, it's my land, we need to make sure that they hear us. And so that applies to the monuments, but it's also definitely going to apply to the sanctuaries when we get that order in the next few weeks.
Right, and some of those monuments are actually under the auspices of NOAA's National Marine Sanctuary Program, so it is intertwined.
Yep.
But yeah, engagement, community engagement, getting the word out, calling, writing, participation is really key.
I've got one more question from the audience, and then I believe Representative Carter is going to wrap up. Is that okay? That's what I needed. I think this one's kind of in Bryn's court, but I think maybe you all understand these things far more than I do. What are your thoughts on large-scale domestic aquaculture production? The U.S. falls behind many other developed countries in this industry, and how can this industry grow while minding strict regulations and permitting standards?
I got a lot of, I worked in the aquaculture, the salmon aquaculture farms. I think, the history of U.S. aquaculture in many ways could, can be seen as a great idea. Everyone gets excited, begins to move in the water. A lot of money rushes in because people see a lot of potential profits in our oceans. Rush in, it hits snags, and then capital rushes out, collapses. Then another project. Other countries have dealt with that through mass subsidies and sort of very patient money that sticks with the project. From my perspective, aquaculture's had lots of problems, and honestly, people get furious at me for saying this, but it's just where folks are. It's the worst brand name in the grocery store. Right? We're beginning to change that, but that's a reality of it. From an economic point of view, from me, and what makes good business sense is, let's look at the ocean, ask what it can provide, not grow around existing tastes and existing markets. I understand why people want to do that, but I look at the ocean and I see 2 things. One, you don't have to fight gravity, so you don't need a lot of infrastructure, which makes it really cheap. It's just some rope, right? And then 2, you don't need to feed anything, right? That makes good business. And I'm a really cheap guy. I run old boats, old engines. I've always been this way, and that's been the secret sauce of success in many ways. So what we want to do is start with what makes sense ecologically, economically, and then shift markets. And that's hard, right? There's no question about it. But to me, when you take the climate crisis, people's need for economic opportunity, and how intensive sort of industrial aquaculture is, which I have yet to see a really viable sort of business, long-term business out there in the ocean. I start from this way.
You guys have been wonderful. I think that Representative Carter will be here in just a minute, but it's always important to me when I'm a panelist to make sure I didn't leave anything out. So if any of you have anything to add in closing, please, we'll just start with Vicki if you have anything and work down the row.
I will make just a quick comment about aquaculture. Hemp is the new thing that's happening.
You're from Colorado, right? Awesome.
They can take the oil of the hemp that is very equivalent to fish oil and feed the single loop aquaculture facility. So that's a potential in the future. But moving beyond that, I just want to stress engagement, community engagement. We talk a lot about how to protect oceans. People aren't really engaged fully. The ocean community talks to the ocean community, and I just think we need to expand it out. The ocean is our resource. We live on an ocean planet, and I just think as we have communications and talk, we just really need to remind people that without a healthy ocean, we will not have a future. So it's seriously intertwined to our long-term and everyday health.
Jeff?
I think we have to keep in mind that we're not going to manage our water bodies, whether it's the Great Lakes or the oceans, from the middle of the lakes and the oceans. That is the way we used to think about things. We have to manage Lake Erie from Fort Wayne, Indiana, and from Findlay, Ohio, and London, Ontario, and we've got to manage the oceans from Boulder, Colorado.
Right.
It's very important that we get to those audiences when we're dealing with the farming community. Right now, we know that about 1/3 of the farmers are doing the right thing. Research has shown that a second third are close to doing the right thing. They're likely going to make the switch. But that third is out there, and we only have voluntary actions, some kind of an incentive or disincentive that would go along with that, or regulations. Those are the only 3 tools that we have. And trying to get to that third and get them to follow suit is one of our big challenges right now.
Brad?
I just say real quickly that if you care about the oceans and you're an environmentalist and you're a conservationist, move to the politics of yes. Like, we need to stop these bad things while we also encourage and build great things, right? And then sort of, let's figure out how to make a living on a living planet, and that's how we're going to move all these issues forward. It's how we're going to build our economy. It's how we're going to feed folks.
Ariel?
Wow. I guess I'll wrap up with a pretty direct call to action. We've already talked a little bit, and Vicki mentioned in her closing comments, just community engagement, contact your representatives. There are a few things happening right now that people should be paying attention to on the Hill. One, we're sort of in our annual appropriations process, and so Congress is working through what spending is going to look like in the fiscal 18 year, which starts in October. They're weighing their priorities against the president's budget, which Jeff mentioned earlier has some pretty substantial cuts to EPA and USDA and a lot of the other agencies that are supportive of inland conservation, but also ocean health. And so, call your representatives, let them know that these issues are important to you and that you want to see funding for these programs retained or increased. That's very important. And then the other piece there is the Farm Bill. We've talked about it, we've kind of danced around it a little bit, but it is coming up soon. The current Farm Bill was passed in 2014. It goes through September 30th of 2018, which seems like it's far away. It's about a year and a half away. But the last bill took 3 years to write. So Congress is already working on this one. They're holding hearings. They are having listening sessions around the country. And they definitely need ideas, and they need to hear from this community about what it is that you care about. And they need to know that research is important and nutrient reduction measures are important. So please be engaged. Call the people who represent you in Congress and let them know that, that this is what you want to see going forward. Mm-hmm. And speaking of our Congresspeople, yeah.
First of all, thank you as a panel. And at this point, our representative, Buddy Carter, is here to wrap this up.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me just take a brief moment to introduce the congressman. So Congressman Buddy Carter of Georgia's 1st District and also home of Gray's Reef National Marine Sanctuary is joining us this afternoon to give closing remarks. Now, as somebody who's a big champion of farmers and also represents a coastal area, I don't think there's a better person to conclude this panel than the congressman to really get that connection between what's going on our land and how it impacts our sea. So without further ado, Congressman Carter.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and welcome to Washington, D.C., your nation's capital. We appreciate you being here, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here especially. Washington's an interesting place, I have to tell you. A lot of times I wonder about the sanity of this place. As a matter of fact, I was driving down the road the other day, and I got behind this car, and I don't drive a whole lot in Washington, but I pay close attention, especially to those in front of me. And I noticed this bumper sticker. On that bumper sticker, it had, "Of all the things I've ever lost in my life, I miss my mind the most." And I thought, how appropriate for Washington, D.C. I don't know where that senator was going, but anyway, he... Just kidding. Y'all tell him I said that. Well, let me tell you about me. My name is Buddy Carter, and I represent the 1st Congressional District of Georgia, which happens to be the greatest district in the United States by chance. And I guess you would expect for me to say that, but I have reason to back that up because it is a great, great district. It is comprised of 17 counties in southeast Georgia. It has a great ag presence, a strong ag presence, particularly in the southern part of our district. South Georgia is famous for our pine trees and for our blueberries. We've got the city of Alma in Bacon County, the blueberry capital of the world. We have a lot of crops there, a lot of agriculture, including forestry. We also have 4 military installations that are very important to our defense and very important to the defense of our country. We have Hunter Army Airfield, Fort Stewart. We also have Kings Bay Submarine Base, as well as Moody Air Force Base. So we're very proud of that. But we also have 100 miles of coastline. You see, I represent all the way from the state of South Carolina down to the state of Florida. 100 miles of coastline on the coast of Georgia, the entire coast of Georgia. You can imagine. Some of you, I suspect, have been there before and have experienced some of the quality of life that we enjoy in that area, particularly in the coastal region. We have some of the barrier islands of Georgia, and many of you may be familiar with some of these. Cumberland Island is one that you've heard of, I'm sure. Sea Island and St. Simons. Perhaps some of you have vacationed there before. But there is one barrier island that I want to tell you about, and it's called Sapelo. Sapelo Island is very important because 19 miles east of Sapelo Island, we have a national treasure, and it's called Gray's Reef. Gray's Reef is one of the largest reefs near the shore of the United States and is just one of 14 marine protected areas that make up the National Marine Sanctuary System. Very important. It consists of 22 square miles. 22 square miles. It has a hard, rocky seafloor where sponges, coral, sea squirts, and a number of other invertebrates live along with numerous other fish and sea creatures swimming up above. It is indeed a national treasure. I don't know how many of you have ever heard of Gray's Reef, but if you haven't, I encourage you to study it and to look it up and to learn more about it because it is indeed a national treasure, and I am honored to represent the area where it's located. You know, there are over 210,000 species of fish that inhabit our oceans, and therefore our coral reefs play a very important role. And certainly Gray's Reef plays a very important role in our area. And you may wonder, well, buddy, why is that so important to you, and why are you so proud of that? And I'll tell you the reason for that. And the reason is because I'm one of those who is very fortunate. You see, yes, the coast of Georgia is my home, but more importantly, the coast of Georgia has been my home all of my life. You see, I was born and bred there. I was born and bred in the coastal Georgia region. I've lived there all my life, and I intend to live there the remainder of my life. Some of my fondest memories were going fishing with my dad. I don't know how many of you have ever been fishing off the coast, but I can tell you it is a great experience, and it was certainly a great experience for me. I've always appreciated our coast. I've always appreciated our oceans because, again, my fondest memories growing up were fishing with my dad. And that's something I want to make sure that my sons and that my grandchildren have that same experience. And it's very important that we make sure that we take care of our coast, we take care of our oceans. And that's why I want to thank you. Thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for what you've been doing and what you continue to do. Thank you for being here at this conference. This is very important for us to interact, to share ideas. And yes, our role in Congress is very important too. That's why it's important for us to work in a bipartisan fashion to make sure that we take care of our oceans, to make sure that that natural resource is there for generations to come. And I commit that I'm going to continue to do that, just as I have in my first 3 years in Congress. Very, very important to me, obviously. Being my home, very important. And I want to make sure that my children and grandchildren have that same opportunity to have those fond memories like I have. So let me thank you. Thank all of you for being here, and thank you for what you do to protect our oceans. God bless you, and thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. And please let us all think what was a terrific panel. You guys covered a lot of issues. It was wonderful. We'll see you back here in about a half an hour for the final panel of Chow, Drawn to the Sea, Why We Explore.